Hi, my name is Darwin Deming. I'm a science teacher at Mount Nebo Junior High currently. I'll be making this video today talking about the different systems of the body. The purpose of this video is for a class that I've taken through the Utah State Office of Education in connection with the Utah Education Network. The course was on human anatomy, and this will be kind of my final review of some of the systems that I've learned. So if you're watching this on YouTube, if you come across this video looking for really detailed information on a specific system, you might want to look elsewhere. This is not going to be incredibly detailed, just kind of summative of the different systems. Don't expect this video to be too long either. So again, probably want to take another look for somewhere else. Anyways, I'm going to start just by looking at some of these pictures here, this flip chart. I do have a three-dimensional model over here that we can take a look at a little bit later. It doesn't have everything I want to show. These are going to help out much more, covering the different types of systems. So just this first page gives it's kind of our title page or table of contents. And I want to start with this first picture because I do not have a specific image on this flip chart of the skeletal system, and since we can kind of see it here with some other types of systems, I'll start with that. But anyways, simply our skeletal systems, like it's our skeleton. Probably very familiar with what the shape looks like from our Halloween pictures and costumes and stuff like that. But general purpose is to give us our structure, to allow our bodies to keep their shape. Without our skeletal system, we'd just be kind of this mushy thing, as most people are aware. It's kind of amazing how it's built and put together, how it allows us to move in the specific directions. And in fact, it's unique to all animals that have a skeletal system to allow it to move. But we have some part of our skeletal system that is not necessarily bone, but cartilage. It allows it to flex. It gives some strength, but some flexibility, such as this blue area you'll see in the ribs, little parts of our nose and other places in between joints to allow the fluid movement, or the smooth movement, I should say. Not that there's a lot of fluid moving through there. But again, not going to go into great detail about that. What's amazing is some of the forces that it can take. Maybe you've seen these football players that really take a hammering, or any sport or activity, and yet we come out relatively unharmed. One thing I like to do personally is running. I like to jog. I've signed up to do my second half marathon this summer, so see how that goes. But when it comes to running, just the amount of force that occurs on a runner, most people have, we all run and walk, and we don't think much of the force, but as a person jogs, the force that can come down at the bottom of the feet can be up to 2.5 times your own body weight. And so it's amazing that this skeletal structure can take that pounding, as well as the muscles, to help absorb that shock. But anyways, we'll move on from here. One of the first things I want to jump into, which is probably one of the more common systems when you think of human anatomy, I don't know, it seems common to me, is our digestive system. One of the neat things I've learned in the course, watching a YouTube video from Bozeman Science, if you look that up on the digestive system, he mentions, Mr. Anderson that is on the video, mentions that the digestive system is kind of like a donut. He said, number one, when you see it, you start salivating because you're like, I want a donut, it's nice and tasty. But in actuality, the whole system is kind of like a donut in that it's just a hole. There's a hole that goes right through it. So our body represents the donut part. Our digestive system is this hole where we enter into the mouth, and we can travel through this entire thing, and out through our colon is one just big long opening. And so food doesn't necessarily go inside of us, but through us. And as it goes through the system, we're able to digest those nutrients, which is kind of amazing, because I always felt like, my stomach's inside of me, but it's just kind of this hole. Interesting way to think of that. But as you're well aware, we start with our mouth. We use our teeth to mash up our food, break it down. Our saliva glands will release saliva that helps start the digestive process for different types of compounds. And then our tongue is a muscle that helps move that around. Swallow it down our esophagus. We'll have muscles that will actually push the food down, so you could even swallow food hanging upside down, drink as well. And then it gets into our stomach, which is basically a storage chamber. We do have stomach acids, helps the digestion, and then it moves into the first part of our small intestines, and they give that a name. They call it the duodenum, or some people pronounce it duodenum, as I've heard, but I've always learned it duodenum. And it's not listed on this chart here, but it's going to be this first small section here. The majority of digestion really takes place. A lot of the breaking down goes in here. We can sort of see it right here. This yellow area is our pancreas, and then we have our gallbladder, which is this kind of pear-looking green one. And they're going to release some enzymes that help digestion. Bile is one of those, helps breaks down the fats, the lipids. And so you get a lot of digestion here. Then in the first part of our, after the duodenum is the jejunum, right? Jejunum. And that is where absorption of the nutrients is going to be taking place. A lot of the absorption. As we get to the next part called the ileum, that will continue with further absorption, but some of the other minerals and nutrients that aren't absorbed in this first part up here. I'm sure I'm getting that right. And then the end of the ileum will go into the large intestine, and these also are broken up into names. But the basic part of our large intestines is to take all the remaining food and compact it together, take water out, and then it works its way down to the rectum and outer colon, where we get rid of it. Okay, so that's our digestive system. Again, very quick and brief. If you really want a lot more detail of this, then we'll have you get to another video. Let's just flip to the next page here. I'm going to flip this around first. And here we have our respiratory system. It's pretty simple one. It's where we get our air and breathing in the oxygen we need. So sort of like the esophagus, we have our trachea. So as we breathe in through our mouth or our nose, we have these cavities that are connected. Breathe down the trachea. It splits into our right and left, which is our bronchi. And as this image is cut here, you can see how it continues to branch out, kind of like the branches of a tree. And we give the smaller tubes different names: bronchial tubes, bronchioles, and then ultimately to the end where we have these air sacs, these really tiny air sacs. And that is where the air transfer is going to take place as we breathe in, take in the oxygen, and the carbon dioxide will come out of our circulatory system, out of our bloodstream, and we'll breathe that out. Okay, so we have some other images here that kind of show some close-up images, but the critical part of this is the connection to the circulatory system, where the diffusion and osmosis of these gases are being transferred. Without that, no good for us. So we see how the heart connects these veins throughout our lungs. Again, not very detailed, much more intricate and detailed on the real level there, but very critical that those two systems interact. Okay. Moving on, we'll just kind of go in order, kind of jumping around. There's not really a great way to do these in order. But then we have our muscular system. This is probably would be best to do after our skeletal system, how our muscles are attached to our skeletal system. And then, as you're well aware, we're going to use these for movement. Okay, without our muscles, we may have structure, but we wouldn't be able to move ourselves. All right. Loads and loads of muscles. I'm not going to go into the names. There's just way too many. Again, I'm gonna have to find some other resource to get a little more detail on that. But what's really interesting that I found out from this lesson is, as we learned about the muscle and kind of zoomed in closer and closer into the tissue to see what's actually going on, that was pretty fascinating to me. I think the greatest resource that was probably helpful to me was probably a video on Khan Academy that where Sal goes into this great detail. Of course, he draws it all out. You can probably find some better animations on some other YouTube videos. But as we go and zoom into our muscles, we see we have these groups of fibers, these cell bundles. We call these the myofibril, fibril. But right here, if we can see in a little bit more detail, let me just pull this up a little bit. We have a contracted and a relaxed myofibril. And what's amazing is, if we could even zoom in closer, we have chemical reactions that are stimulated by our nervous system, our neurons, that has these little red things. They look kind of like combs, that they kind of like creep forward. They kind of grip and they bunch closer together, which is a contraction. It pulls that fiber together. So we can see how this area it's much shorter, and this area it's much longer, where it's relaxed and then contracted. And just the idea that this chemistry is taking place, it just astounds me that it does that. It's so crazy how incredible our bodies are, right? Again, can't go into much more detail than that. We're going to flip over. So, it is the job of our nervous system kind of send signals to tell our body what to do. So here we have a just simple picture. Our nervous system, the main organ is going to be our brain, of course, and then we have a lot of these nerve fibers that are coming out. Our spinal cord, they spread out throughout the body, the ends of the limbs, tip of the fingers to the tip of the toes, and everywhere else. There are different types of nerve cells that are in the skin or the integumentary system that can detect temperature or pressure or pain and stuff like that. But again, just our brain is absolutely fascinating. It's this command center where it sends these signals and tells things what to do. It's just amazing that it can store information and have us, live and do everything on our day-to-day basis. I can take a look at some of these nerve cells where one end of the cell of a dendrite, okay, so we have the dendrites, which are these kind of spider branches looking things here, will send signals or receive signals from the axon that comes down here to these terminals here. Chemical signals are sent across, and again, we get these electrical impulses that travel just at incredible speeds. It's amazing that this can happen. Different parts of the brain responsible for different types of functions. We'll talk a little bit about a couple of those as we talk about the endocrine system, which I think is coming up. Yeah, we'll go ahead and flip that over this way here. And our endocrine system is going to be responsible for sending different hormones throughout the body, okay? So we have our hypothalamus, our pituitary gland. You can see both of these, the blue and then the yellow. We have our thyroid gland, and including the ovaries and testes in the sexual organs that also will be releasing hormones. And so they have different jobs. Our hypothalamus is going to, just a few lists here, the things that it controls It's going to govern body temperature, thirst, hunger, sleep, circadian rhythms, your moods, sex drive, and releases other hormones to get things going. It also sends signals to the pituitary gland, which is also kind of known as the master gland, because it sends signals, hormones that tell other endocrine glands what to do, such as the adrenal glands, which, where do we have those? On the kidneys, but I'm not seeing them here. There we are. On our kidneys there, at least on that one. Okay. And so speaking of the adrenal glands, you're probably familiar with chemical adrenaline. When you get that kind of nervousness, you have an adrenaline rush, fight or flight response. So that's responsible for a lot of interesting things as well. It minimizes the negative and allergic reactions such as swelling and inflammation to alcohol, drugs, foods, environmental allergens, cancer, infections, autoimmune disorders, etc. Also, it can control or is responsible, major source of sex hormones during midlife, such as for women like menopausal periods. And then we have our thyroid glands, which releases different types of thyroid hormones, and that is responsible for affecting most of our cells in our body and making sure they're functioning. My wife, for example, had hypothyroidism and hyperthyroidism, been taking medication, and we had to do a process to kind of just destroy that before we could have children, because the medication that people will take is not necessarily safe to be pregnant on. All right, so kind of in relationship to our sexual organs, they will release hormones to stimulate the sexual organs, especially during the time of pubescence. For women, it'll start with the regular ovarian cycles. For men, it starts developing sperm and just all that preparation for that good stuff. We do have an image here of our reproductive system for just men and women. Again, don't want to spend too much time on these, but it gets pretty fascinating how all this stuff kind of works out. What's interesting to me is that in the ovaries, when eggs are released, they're not even touching the fallopian tubes, but these little fingers here will kind of make these sweeping motions that pulls the egg into it. And fertilization will take place in the fallopian tube versus the actual uterus. And then it will attach into the uterus, into the endometrium lining, and start to grow. And voila, that's how we're created and born. And then just the reproductive system for men as well. The testes will create the sperm through the process of meiosis, same with the eggs inside the ovaries, and stored in our epididymis, and then that gets released during sexual stimulation. And when the two cells meet up, and you can probably see it down here low, that we have fertilization between the two. Since these are haploid cells, you're going to get a pair of DNA from the mom, pair of DNA from the dad, and you get the combination in sexual reproduction versus asexual reproduction, where you only have, a replication of all the DNA. Okay. All right. What do we got left here? Just really quickly, I don't want to spend much time on this, but we have our immune system, and I guess it wouldn't be justice to not at least touch on this, but our immune system is kind of related to our circulatory system. In fact, I don't think we have a circulatory system picture here. But we have white blood cells that are found in our circulatory system, and there's different types that are going to affect different pathogens that get inside our body. So if it's a virus, or if it's an allergen, or if it's bacteria, or something else, these different cells are going to be triggered. They're going to have responses, antibodies that are going to alert the specific cells to to attack the pathogen, and for the body to make more of those. But again, that gets transferred through our respiratory or circulatory system. One thing I found fascinating is that the big bulk of our white blood cells are going to be found near our digestive system. And I didn't think of it, but naturally that's one of the greatest influx of foreign contaminants or pathogens, and so it can attack it right there on the spot versus letting it get throughout the body, which is pretty cool. Okay, so again, not too much time on that one. I guess I'll flip this one over. At the end here, and this back page kind of repeats the one we just saw on the front page of the mixture of systems. But we do include some of our others here. Here we have our heart. It's going to be the major function of our circulatory system, the pump that's driving the circulatory system, the blood through the circulatory system. Again, that's critical. That's going to be the roads of the body where a lot of hormones and oxygen and contaminants are being transferred throughout the body. This includes our urinary system, where as the blood flows to the kidneys, it goes through a series of networking and tubing. Again, I'm not getting into the details here, but it filters contaminants out of the blood, stores it in the bladder, and then once it reaches a certain point, it is stimulated to release that out of the body. Okay. Again, I think it was a Khan Academy that had a really good video on that. An interesting TED Talk, I think it was. Maybe it was one of the TED animations that talked about the brain, how we don't quite have a system that gets rid of contaminants and, you know, all the garbage, the trash that leaves our cells. We don't have a system that drains it out of our brain. So they're saying, how do they do this? Well, it's been hypothesized and studied that as we sleep, some of those tissues kind of contract, allow for better movement, and there's this release of fluid, and hazy on the details here, that kind of mimic the circulatory system that goes throughout the brain, and it allows that just through, you know, osmosis to get into the blood system that way and make its way to the kidneys and get out of the body. What you get is like, how does it do it? That's just amazing, incredible. Not much more that I wanted to get into detail here. Here's the details of the kidney, just as a side note. And so I did want to hold this model over just for a little bit here. Slide it off to the side. But here we just have a three-dimensional model where not a lot comes out. Our dude's missing a brain here, but obviously that's where you'd pull that out and take a look at that. There's so much, again, that you could include here. So we have the lungs, left and right, and our respiratory system. And this is nice because you can kind of see how it's all overlapped. And it's amazing that all this stuff fits in our bodies in the first place. So if we take that out, we have our heart. It's going to be found underneath it. You'll notice that the heart's more towards the center of the body. A lot of people think it's off to the left side. It's kind of lobed that way, but it's kind of more in the center. So when you do CPR, you're pushing right on that the cartilage part of the ribs in the skeletal system. That flexes a little bit. You can push down on that heart, and that's what helps it do the pumping during CPR. It allows that circulation. So a little FYI there. So we take the heart out here. You can get a little closer look on how it was put in there. We have our major veins and arteries. Again, I'm not going to spend detail on the names here, but you can see how they come in and leave. Parts of these are going to go straight to the lungs, okay, for that circulation and transfer of oxygen and carbon dioxide. And the other side is going to get spread out to go to the rest of the body, to the head and to the feet. I guess when you talk about cardiac arrest, they say there's pain in the left side, numbness in the left arm. That's going to be just how these veins are related there. You can pop it open and kind of see the different chambers a little bit, how blood is going to flow through those. as well. It's a nice little model, nice to have in class if you can get to that, if you cover it. So we can see these are numbered, but I don't have a key to these. But as we go down the mouth, we have our trachea and our esophagus for our respiratory and digestive systems. I'm not sure if that's what's listed here. So there's this blue one here. It's going to be our trachea into our bronchi. And then I think this green one is going to be our esophagus that goes down into the stomach. So here's our liver right there. I didn't mention, but that's going to be used for also cleaning, filtering the blood. Get that out. Right. So here's our stomach, and we can see our esophagus that goes in here. We can pull that out, and this tube here will start going into the small intestines, the duodenum. And then we have our big bulk, this grayish part, going to be the large intestines, and this lighter green going to be our smaller intestines, the different pieces there. And so you can continue to take these out. It gives you the rectum, colon part, which will lead out the anus where you get rid of your feces, including the bladder here. In the back, maybe it's a little hard to see with the lighting, but we have our kidneys there, okay, and then the tube that leads down to the bladder. Here we have our blood veins and arteries that are going down to the lower limbs. What else do we have here? This one up here, is that our spleen? I think so. I don't think we talked much about the spleen in class. But I think that's about as much as will come out, at least from the inside. You see these little white yellow knobs here. That's going to be part of the rib cage that's exposed. Our different muscles, how they overlap in different directions to make the different movements. And I think that's all we have from Bob here. Because if you put him in water, that's all he can do. Bob. Okay. Anyways, those are some of the simple systems of the human body. Again, if you want a little more detail on these, you're going to have to check out some of the resources. And I appreciate you taking the time to watch. Big thanks to Ricky Scott for being my instructor this term. It's been good to work with you. I give a big thanks to my my colleagues, my other students in the class. A lot of interesting information being said and enlightening in ways of science. I'd like to thank my wife for marrying me, and for Leprechauns for making Lucky Charms, as well as Keebler Elves for making cookies without lighting their tree on fire. So, anyways, thank you.